Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 16th Fluorescent Friday event. My name is Dr. Lina Cardenas, and I'll be your host today. I'm a member of the Color Council and an assistant professor at the School of Design at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to keep your camera off and mic muted during the event. Thank you. Please use the chat box to tell us who you are, where you're from, and your affiliation with a university, company, or another organization. We are all part of the global color community, and we want to hear from you. The Inter-Society Color Council created Flourescent Fridays as a global platform for university students from all disciplines to network with color professionals and fellow students, and to share state-of-the-art resources about color's role in our lives and applications in the world. I would like to invite you to visit our website to learn about upcoming events, join our mailing list, and learn about the benefits of becoming a member. Also, be sure to check out the videos from our previous Fluorescent Friday presentations, along with many other resources. Today's presentation is titled Creating Color Stories in Printed Layers, Shining the Fluorescent Friday Spotlight on Professor Laura Berman and her printmaking students, Esther Bach, Hannah Dixon, Analee, Hyacinthe, and Sarah Manuel from the Kansas City Art Institute in Kansas City, Missouri, and the United States. They will introduce us to the Kansas City Art Institute and share their BFA thesis work in printmaking, focused on color, process, form, and narrative. The printmaking department teaches a unique course, Color and Printmaking, developed by Laura, in which students determine and define their own color story within their artwork. The timeline today is 60 minutes. After the presentations, there will be a Q&A discussion with the audience. During the presentations, we encourage you to type your questions and comments in the chat box so the speakers can address them during the Q&A session. Our first speaker is Laura Berman, a visual artist and professor in the printmaking department at the Kansas City Art Institute, where she has taught courses in printmaking, book arts, and color since 2002. Last year, Laura was a Fulbright Senior Scholar at the University of Canberra, Australia, where she furthered her research on printmaking and color. Laura, welcome to Fluorescent Fridays.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me and see this shared screen all right?
Perfect.
Yes, it's fine.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much to the Inter-Society Color Council for the invitation to join you all today. The Fluorescent Friday program is one of a kind, and we thank Luann Staval, Lina Cardenas Bayona, Jean Hoskin, Mary Mello, and Nader Sagdoki for all of your help behind the scenes. We're speaking with you today from Kansas City, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Kaw Nation, the Osage Nation, Oto, and Missouri peoples. Many other tribal nations have ties to the Kansas City region through treaty and forced marches. We give gratitude to the elders past and present and support the continuing relationship between Indigenous people and this land. I'm joined today by my students at Kansas City Art Institute. From left to right, Analee Hyacinthe, Sarah Manuel, Esther Bach, and Hannah Dixon. They are all in their final thesis semester here at KCAI in the printmaking department, and they're about to graduate in just 2 weeks with their Bachelor of Fine Arts degrees. Today, I'll introduce our school and our program, and I'll talk about how we teach color in the printmaking curriculum, and then the students will each speak about their own work and their projects. Kansas City is in the middle of the United States. In fact, Lebanon, Kansas, about 200 miles northwest of here, is the geographic center of the 48 contiguous states. However, our group is from many places. Two of us were born abroad, and collectively we've lived in numerous places across the country. Kansas City is a robust, mid-sized Midwestern city. The city has a cultural heritage that includes jazz music and great barbecue, a strong agricultural economy, deep support of arts and design, and maybe you've heard of our world-class sports teams. The Kansas City Art Institute is located in Midtown Kansas City, a historical neighborhood full of trees, just a few miles from downtown and the Crossroads Gallery District. Our campus is nestled between the Nelson Atkins Art Museum and the Kemper Contemporary Art Museum. Entry to both museums is free, and our students and faculty and classes enjoy this easy access to inspiring art collections at both museums. KCAI was founded in 1885. Our institution is a nonprofit private school which grants Bachelors of Fine Art degrees in 13 different majors. We have over 750 students who are studying animation, art history, ceramics, creative writing, fiber, filmmaking, graphic design, illustration, painting, photography, printmaking, product design, and sculpture. Our history is long and illustrious, and some of our alumni include Walt Disney, the painter Robert Rauschenberg, and the interdisciplinary artist Nick Cave, to name just a few. The KCAI campus has a lot of character. Each building contains its own programs, and each has a unique architectural style. The center of our campus holds a beautiful large green space where we teach classes and gather for volleyball games and install public art projects. The printmaking department is a one-level open floor plan studio. We have an entire wall of north-facing windows, which provides some of the best studio light on campus. This spans our entire studio. It's really important for working with color to have this light. In the studio, you'll see separate areas for lithography, screen printing, letterpress, monoprint, and etching and relief processes. In addition, we have classrooms and critique spaces and individual studio spaces for students. Our studio is a communal space in which students work alongside each other, and different printmaking equipment is located in the same or nearby workspaces. And this setup lends itself well to collaboration and also a community-oriented educational setting. The BFA in printmaking is a 3-year curriculum at KCAI, which requires students to learn and work with a variety of printmaking methods. Our curriculum culminates with a focused body of artwork, which is presented in a public exhibition, an artist lecture, and a thesis research paper. And this is the group of students that are going to present today at their thesis exhibition on the right. We work with both hand-based processes and digital technologies. Some of the techniques that our students learn include monoprint, etching, relief print, screen print, lithography, dimensional printmaking and book arts, and also color in printmaking. Printmaking is an art media that sits between both commercial and fine art, and between an industry and the individual artist. Making prints involves learning how to control thin layers of highly pigmented inks. For this reason, there's a highly technical side to how printmakers make their art. We learn to understand visual systems in printmaking in relation to color, from using the cyan, magenta, yellow, black palette, to working with transparency in color, to how to best angle halftone patterns in layers to avoid unwanted moire patterns when printing images. Color can be one of the hardest things to control in printmaking, maybe in life as well. Color is always added in layers. So every color choice in a print is a relational and also a physical choice. Some colors sit better on top of other colors due to how heavy or how opaque certain pigments are. And some ink colors behave differently on humid days, or they dry too fast while printing. It's very easy to get muddy with colors quickly in building layered prints. In 2019, I developed and began teaching the class Color and Printmaking at KCAI. This class is unique in the field of printmaking education, and it's required for our majors. I designed the class as a way to demystify color in the printmaking medium and also as a way to encourage students to find their own color compass. Layered color is a signature of my own printed work. I've worked with these printing methods for almost 20 years. My work references my experiences in the natural world, along with my ongoing painting practice. I also publish an online archive of interviews with contemporary artists who work in both color and printmaking. The website for my project, Reflections on Color and Printmaking, hosts 80 of these interviews. And in 2024, I worked as a senior Fulbright scholar at the University of Canberra, Australia, where I deepened my research on color and printmaking from the Australian perspective. This research is tied to a book that I'm writing about color and printmaking. While I was in Australia last year, Heinrich Toe, an artist in Kansas City, taught the color and printmaking class at KCAI because I wasn't here. Heinrich works in multi-layered photo plates, building rich surfaces that relate to personal memories. Some of the students that are with us today studied with me in the color print course, and some studied with Heinrich in the class, and they'll talk about that in their presentations. The projects in the color and printmaking class examine color as a material, a substance, a form of expression, and as perceptual and tangible relationships. One of my inspirations for designing this class was knowing that color ink not only portrays a visual language of seeing, but that it is a very real thing in itself, with infinite tangible and behavioral qualities. One of the assignments in this class requires students to physically create an ink color of their own. In this image, I'm working with turmeric and beets, homemade walnut ink, and a sandstone rock from Oklahoma to create relief prints. This student for that assignment foraged their family home and its backyard for their palette. The color inks that they made included things like crabapple, dad's flowers, hawthorn, mac and cheese, and lipstick. The class also does standard exercises, such as creating different values using hand-mixed printing ink. Mixing ink is very different from mixing paint. The tiniest change or addition of a color to another can dramatically affect the tone, the intensity, or the hue of the color that you're trying to make. We also work with light to form experimental palettes. In this project, students deconstruct a print they've made, use that as a base to explore an additive light palette, and then use their photos of that experiment to create the next series of printed works. Translating a three-dimensional additive palette and form into a two-dimensional image with subtractive color palettes is not that easy. In the early 1700s, Jacques Leblond invented a tricolor mezzotint method of printing. In this image on the left, Leblond uses indigo, yellow, carmine, and bistre to create a continuous tone portrait. This print predates photography and lithography, and the point of this work was to create realistic images that could be reproduced, often for medical and science books. Color is really important for medical illustrations. This method of printing was laborious and technically tricky, so it was not adopted widely, especially after lithography and photography came into use in the 1800s. I often think about how amazing it is that Leblond achieved this precursor to the modern CMYK print without the industry and technology that we use today. Leblond used basically just his imagination to break down both the form and palette into printable layers, and he and his apprentices worked by sunlight and candlelight, and they had to make their paper and ink by hand too. In some ways, it's an oxymoron to create a CMYK engraving, which is another assignment from the color and printmaking class. For this assignment, we work with intaglio plates, which are hand engraved. These are copper plates that I'm using in this video. So they're carved by hand, And this is one of the oldest printmaking techniques. It dates back to, its history is related to how armor was decorated and decorative arts with metals. So pretty far back. This project balances simplicity and complexity with a historical and also a contemporary approach to color printmaking. And this is a video that I put together for the color and printmaking class in 2020 when we were teaching during the pandemic. So I'm working on a 3D printed press that's on my shelf behind me as well up here, but it's a little hobby press, but it works really well. So in summary, the color and printmaking class at KCAI demystifies color as both a material and as a form of visual language. I'll end by sharing some of the questions that we try to answer in this class. Is color matter or form? Is color ever stable? How passive or how active is vision? To what does color belong? Does it belong to people or to things or to ideas? Is anything objective with color? And what does it mean to use color in your work when color itself is so hard to define? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Esther Bach. Esther is a graduating senior in printmaking whose work explores liminal home interiors and feelings of nostalgia and longing through the mediums of lithography and mesothins. In her free time, she can be found craving Taco Bell and knitting things for her friends. Esther, welcome to Flourescent Fridays.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Like Lina said, my name is Esther Bach. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I am currently studying printmaking at KCAI, and I will be graduating with my BFA in T-minus 15 days. Thank you so much again for having me. I'd like to start where it all began for me. 812 Mississippi Avenue, El Paso, Texas, 79902, the place I called home for the first 12 years of my life. This house made such a big impact on who I am that when it came time to pick a subject matter to focus on for my senior year thesis, it was a no-brainer. I was going to make work about 812 Mississippi Avenue. The work itself started with a floor plan of the house, drawn from memory, which became the basis of a paper-cut model of my home in which every room was modular. When making the model, it was important for me that they were white, so that when I took my reference photos, color was not yet a consideration. I could focus entirely on the range of values in the images without the distraction of a color. These are some of the photos that I referenced for the 9 copper mezzotint plates that I made. This is where a little bit of printmaking technical mumbo jumbo comes in. A mezzotint is a printmaking process created by Ludwig von Siegen in 1641. His first mezzotint is pictured on the right, that involves using a curved steel blade with hundreds of points on it, called a rocker, which you can see in the video on the left, to build up tooth on a copper plate. You do this by rocking the blade across the surface in at least 8 different directions, over and over and over. It's a process that requires a lot of patience. And when a rocked plate is inked up, the tooth you've created holds ink, which means it would print completely black. You then use steel burnishers and scrapers, like the one pictured here, to work back into the tooth and bring back in your midtones and highlights, creating form reductively rather than additively. Historically, it was favored for its intensely rich blacks created by the tooth and the smooth transitions of value created by the burnishing and scraping, which made it ideal for reproducing portraiture, though it fell out of fashion with the advent of lithography in 1796. Here is a video of me pulling a print from the series. It's possibly the most rewarding part of making. It's the fruits of so much labor paying off. And it's also very satisfying to watch. I find myself attracted to mezzotints for many of the same reasons that they were historically appreciated, but also because it is such a laborious, time-intensive process. The rocking of one of my plates can take upwards of 6 hours. Multiply that by the 9 plates in the series, and you get a lot of time to just sit, listen to the rocker, and think. It's a meditative process for me. And it's a process in which, my opinion, leads to some incredibly beautiful prints with a richness unique to the method. But this is not a lecture on mesotints, it's one on color. So where does color come to play in my work? Well, it comes to play in the color of ink I use and the color of paper I choose to print on, which are integral to the mood of the work. While these prints are monochromatic, they are not achromatic. The top palette here is an achromatic palette, meaning it lacks any hue. It's just a range of values. While a monochromatic palette, like the one on the bottom, is made up of a single hue that has been lightened and darkened to create a range of values. This is what the work would look like printed in black ink on white paper. It's very different, right? For me, the choice of a warm brown ink on tan paper ties back into history and the colors we associate with time and age. Sepia toning is a chemical process that makes film photography more archival. I am not a photography person, I am a printmaker, so this is a very basic understanding, but it takes an achromatic image and chemically adds in the hue, making it monochromatic. Many images from historical archives are sepia toned, like these two great images I pulled from the Smithsonian. And when the goal of my thesis body of work is to reaffirm my connection to this house that I have not stepped foot in for a decade, to tie a cord from me to it, to establish a history, an archive of 812 Mississippi Avenue as I choose to remember it, sepia and its histories are one of the tools in my toolbox that help me achieve this goal. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Esther, for that wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Hannah Dixon. She's a graduating senior working towards her BFA in printmaking and art history. Hannah uses lithography, monotype, and screen printing processes in her practice. Looking ahead, she plans to attend a graduate program for printmaking. Hannah, the screen is yours. Welcome to Flourescent Fridays.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. My name is Hannah Dixon. I'm from Carthage, Missouri, a small town in the Ozarks. After I graduate, I plan on visiting graduate schools and programs and continuing my printmaking education. I also had Heinrich Toe as my professor for the color and printmaking class. During this course, I was able to fully experiment with color and dedicate time to focus on color as a technical approach to printmaking. And we spoke about ideas surrounding color theory and the ways that colors impact each other. What went from experimenting and making many colorful prints turned into having more confidence in my ability to add color to my own personal work. I began to use color more freely, but also with much more intention with each print. Because of the ability to experiment and play with color, this class ultimately impacted the way I thought out and planned my thesis work. Where I'm from and my personal familial history has everything to do with the art that I make. Almost a year ago, I found about 2 hours of family footage from the late 60s that I had never seen before. Most of the people in the footage were not familiar to me, however, the land was. Seeing familiar places such as Indian Creek, which is shown in this print and this video, began to inform my work. This is another piece and another scene from Indian Creek that I have broken down into frames and printed using a CMYK print process. When working with photos, I am already handed a color palette. Instead of making my own color, I choose to edit what is already there by tinting my CMYKs. Before I can actually make the physical print, I start in Photoshop. I use Photoshop to separate my image into 4 separate files, one for each color. Each file becomes half-toned, and this half-tone is integral to the CMYK process. If you were to take a magnifying glass to one of my prints, this is what it would look like. Tiny dots created from the halftone turn into a layering system to create a full color image. Each color is set at a different angle to peek through or to hide one another, creating a pattern called a rosette. Once I have created my files and have them set at the correct corresponding angles, they are now ready for the next step. I print off each file onto a transparent film, and then I attach the film to a photosensitive plate. The plate is exposed in an exposure unit where we can control the amount of light that leaks onto the plate. You can see, I'm sorry, Laura. Thank you. As you can see in the left image, this is an exposure unit, and this is what the process typically looks like. And the right image shows the before and after of the bottom plates before exposure, and the top plates is what it looks like after exposed and developed. No matter what kind of print process I use, color is consistent to me when using CMYK processes. There is already a formula that is handed to me, but instead of sticking to the book, I tend to tint my colors. This means adding a consistent small amount of white ink into each of the 4 colors. I choose to do this because I like to be able to alter the photos by hand rather than digitally, and it makes it more personal to my work. Once I have my ink ready and my plate prepped, all there is left to do is to print. The left image shows what my print looks like after the yellow and magenta layers are printed, and the right image shows the completed print after the cyan and the black layers. And then finally onto my thesis work. Whenever it came to creating and planning my BFA thesis print, I used the same techniques that I have been practicing with color and CMYK and altering photos through ink and color. So I use the same techniques that I've been experimenting all the way from the color class. And I compiled these images through the same film that I've been focusing on. And then this is my final BFA piece. And you can see some of the color blending through the different layers. The yellow is peeking through the magenta, which is peeking through the cyan. And that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing your work with us. Our next speaker is Analee Hyacinthe, a graduating senior pursuing a BFA in printmaking. Analee is a printmaker, painter, and book artist who creates short, Gothic illustrations featuring themes of idolization, the pursuit of power, and death. She works as a puppeteer under Soulbird Studios, performing at venues such as the 18 and Vine Art Fest in Kansas City Renaissance Fair. Analee, welcome to Flourescent Fridays.
Thank you. My name is Analee Hyacinthe, and I am a Haitian American artist studying at KCI for my senior year. And I primarily do narrative-based art and illustration in the form of etchings, artist books, and artist objects. For my senior thesis, I developed my pieces around the short story of an astronaut stranded on a crumbling moon and accosted by little space ducks. And it's mostly about the afterwards of the astronaut getting isolated and what they're thinking and the conversation interrupted. The first piece here is called Untethered, and it's a state change etching that I printed 3 times in a edition of 3. And then the next piece is called Radio Interference. That is a screen printed scarf that I that is several different transparencies painted and layered on top of each other. For my BFA piece, it is called Simulcast in Orbit, and it is a hanging installation at the KCI Gallery. I work sequentially, starting from color, contrasting thumbnails, to layer parts that are put together to make a much larger composition. And in the video, you can see pieces for my BFA piece being laser cut. I also hand draw a lot of my transparencies in black ink, so to maintain like a level of my own hand and opacity while working. And I also record a lot of the inks that I use, and I record them and make recipes so I could reuse them for different editions. I was in Laura's color and printmaking class, and it got me thinking about color more conscientiously, as I would use it and I wouldn't really be intentional. So these two assignments where we were supposed to make a collograph and a set of dual tone prints in different palettes for each one, it got me thinking much more seriously about what I'm going to do and how should I work with color and how should I think about color. This is another example of the work that we were doing in Laura's color and print class, where we would create paper models or paper printed models and put them in different lighting situations to create new color palettes from them. I've begun to, a little bit before thesis, I've begun to start experimenting with a much more CMYK oriented palette and then developed that for my thesis. And I kind of just started favoring colors such as indigo or magenta to use for specific traits. Also, recently, I have been researching polychromy, the art historical aspect of polychromy, and how like the people in the ancient world were thinking about color, especially in context to places of worship, or just the idea of who can wear or who can use this color and how it was perceived during that time. For example, this frieze would be on like a wall of a wealthier patron, as the colors used were more than likely azurite or lapis rather than something much cheaper like Egyptian blue. And like I started basically messing around and experimenting on my own with how would I make my own color story, essentially. And that's where I got the idea for making magenta ducks. If blue was used in the same way in the ancient world to kind of display, especially in ancient Greece, to display how, like divinity, I can use the same thing, this magenta, to kind of highlight what's not quite there, or what is not quite what it seems. And that's where I have what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And Sarah Manuel is our final speaker, an Asian American artist working in printmaking and digital processes. Sarah explores themes of cultural identity and adoption through images of family and pop culture. After graduating from KCI AI this semester, she plans to work as a summer intern at Anderson Ranch Art Center in Snowmass Village, Colorado. Sarah, welcome to Flourescent Fridays.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. As Lina said, my name is Sarah Manuel. I'm a Chinese American artist from Olathe, Kansas, just 30 minutes outside the greater KCMO area. I'm currently studying printmaking, and I am a digital fabrication technician at our on-campus fabrication lab, Build Studios. And I am going to Anderson Ranch this summer as an intern. And Anderson Ranch is basically an arts and crafts school that hosts like over 100 workshops each summer. So thank you for having me. Hold on. I first wanted to talk about what kind of influences I'm coming with when I'm thinking about color. I'm inspired by pop culture and comics, and often in my work I increase saturation and vibrancy in my work to mimic these kind of commercial looks. And so when I gather reference, I find that I can often achieve these colors using these fluorescent colors in tandem with more traditional colors and pigments, as you've seen from previous presentations. And so combined with knowledge of CMYK, as well as this combination of tools and knowledge, it's really perfect for achieving this kind of bubblegum look. So color for me in this instance is coming from this commercial world, is starting with something very mass produced, and then ultimately making something personal from it. So when I learned about color for the first time, I had not considered how dynamic it could be just from mixing like 6 main colors for my color class. So we had red, blue, yellow, white, black, and then a magenta. And so as an artist coming from a primarily digital background, figuring out how to replicate colors I could see on a screen to a physical piece became a goal of mine. I found myself beginning to create kind of a color library. So I ended up saving everything I mixed to try and incorporate them into a body of growing work. I was kind of like a little crow collecting shiny little packets of ink. So when I think about color for myself, I find that I gravitate towards these complementary colors, a lot of reds and greens for me. And within this constraint, I modify value, hue, opacity, and with all the little nuances that go into picking a color. So to put it into layman terms, if you thought picking a color for your living room was hard, imagine having to mix the color yourself from memory and then get it to play nice with the other walls you painted 3 different colors that will all look slightly different based on the time of day and how thick they are on based on the wall color beneath. Oh, and you really don't know how it's going to look until you put it on the wall with your eyes closed. So color and printmaking is almost like a 4D chess game in that sense. Next slide. And so then knowing how color operates, let's talk about how I implemented it. This is a series of work I collaborated on with my professor, color professor Heinrich Toe during my time in the color class. And what I found through working in this process you see here of monoprint and monotype is how dynamic color becomes when the matrix, also known as the printing substrate you're working with, is flexible. So using inexpensive materials, as you see here in black and white Xeroxes called paper lithography, I can really experiment and take a lot of risks without, spending too much money. And so the process is this concept of hydrophilic, which means water loving, and hydrophobia, water hating. And so the Xeroxes will accept ink in the toner areas, but reject it in the non-toner areas. And so the prints pictured here were a result of a semester's work of experimentation. And so I learned how color can bring out narrative and tell a story. So together we combined imagery from our own image libraries, and through commonality of color and process, we created a series of very playful, dreamlike prints. And so this is my thesis piece I made titled Fu Qi, which translates from Chinese as a blessing. It's one long scroll piece, but for documentation purposes, it's cut, sliced in half. And this is meant to be read however you want. there are 7 still images bookended by these sweeping pagodas on either side. And so I chose images that evoke travel, movement through space, and having people entering and exiting the space. So color photographs are traded for black and white to become almost a backdrop for the imagined in my work. And so colorful stickers then are glued on top in an attempt to disrupt this seamless narrative going on beneath. A perfect memory that maybe didn't exist to begin with. So thus I'm questioning what happens when fiction becomes more true than reality. So how do I think about color in the context of my work? I think of color as character. In this work, I have photographs that contain people, but they are pushed to the background. Instead, inanimate objects, symbols, and toys become focal points for the narrative. Their vibrancy commands attention that the black and white pictures do not, and so with their graphic quality, being largely flat fields of color, they also contrast a hyper reality of the scene going on behind them. And so they emphasize their disruptive quality to an otherwise seamless narrative. And so my thesis work is ultimately concerned with my identity as a Chinese American adoptee. And so color is a crucial element to this process. I found its strength as an extension of storytelling and personal narrative. Really kind of show up in the work with these vibrant pops of color. It's a culmination of interests, memory, and things I love. And so intuitively, it's often guiding this work, and I'm like a vessel or messenger of the message, if you will. And so without these colorful stickers, I feel like the work would only be an homage to something I lived but couldn't necessarily remember. So with the black and white, it belongs to a different time, and when color is present, it too becomes brought forward into the future and the now. So my hope and intent with color is to bring joy to those who view it. Thank you for listening. Here is a little video of me showing the length of the full scroll. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we would like to go to the Q&A session. So if you have questions for our guest speakers, please write them down or so they can answer them for you.
So Lina, I wrote down some questions to ask. I'm going to start with Laura. I understand that the presentation today was focused on layering and layering of colors, but I was wondering if you opened up the candy store to your students in your class and discussed spot colors. And if you did, how did you teach that or manage that?
So we don't have an assignment in my class that's about spot colors, but we talk about the flatness of colors a lot in printmaking. But those flats can often be transparent as well because they'll layer. So yes and no, I guess would be the way to talk to answer that. Because we're not just focused on commercial inks or commercial printing technologies. We really do everything by hand. We're even playing with like opacity and translucency by hand as well. So I don't know if that answers, but we definitely have a fine arts approach to color ink and color printing, which definitely marries with how industry approaches the same materials. But we do emphasize like that artistic, exploratory, kind of experimental side of color. So yes and no. Students that are interested in, say, screen printing and letterpress arts and techniques in sort of a more commercial printing career track, perhaps, in Kansas City are really lucky because there's a lot of studios they can intern with to learn more about Pantone colors, for instance, like how to mix those, because we don't really teach that here because it's more about artisticness with color. But there are places in town that students can work for credit and learn spot colors, Pantone black, things like that.
Well, that's great. And I liked your distinction between the fine art approach and the commercial approach, because using a limited palette really, really pushes the creativity. and how to problem solve. Okay.
Sure.
So the prints are beautiful. And I was wondering, since it is an open studio, collaborative studio, if any of the students have a story to tell about how collaboration with other students or with you help them shift the direction of their work or their approach to storytelling. Any takers?
I think that's a good question for Sarah. Because you worked with Heinrich directly on some of your monoprints as a collab, like a real collaboration.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a period of time in which I really was like struggling with the process. So I almost broke down like my version of a Heinrich print and I brought it to Crit and I was like, what do you think? And he was like, oh, please, please don't do that again. And he was like, basically like the use of color was good and like it definitely reflected like this kind of like dreamscape that the ideas like he works in and also I was trying to develop in my own work, but like I definitely felt like I had to almost like invert the process for a way that I understood. So I was almost collaborating with his work in an attempt to like make my own. So I guess that's like a little funny story I have.
Well, I have a question specifically for Analee, and that is, how do you come up with your stories?
So a lot of my stories are kind of on the scale of Junji Ito idea making, where it's like it would be so weird if X, Y, or Z happened. But I also have a strong fascination with classical fairy tales and epic poetry. So recently I've been rereading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and looking into the Orlando Furioso for reference. Recently I've been kind of looking into, due to my art history classes, the tale of Rustam, which is from Islamic art history itself and like the art, and we were discussing the art in class and just revisiting Greek and Roman mythology also.
Excellent inspiration. It's great. So now that you all have completed your projects, does anybody have what would you change story?
I think in an ideal world with infinite time, I would have made more than 9 prints. I would have loved to have just like made and made and made and just had just a huge wall full of all these different combinations of these rooms and the order of them. But obviously, like I explained in my presentation, mezzotints are very time consuming. And so I did what I could, but it is where my practice is planning to go after this, is just continuing to expand.
So I'd like to invite Sandy to unmute and ask her question directly about color systems, because we've talked about CMYK and I'm not sure if there's something else you want to specifically ask about.
Good morning, everyone. The question that I had was, do printmakers use color system to develop colors? And if so, what system is preferred and why? I see the students mixing colors, and but I didn't see like a reference to like NCS so that you could see how a particular color shifted from say a yellow to more of a cooler color as you changed, and how you would replicate that ink color once you did find a color that you liked. So was there a reference that you were using to do that and to guide you in creating your colors?
That's such a good question. I think maybe Hannah might want to tackle that one. And while you think about it, Hannah, I can also share, like I just pulled this off my desk, but like this is my color system. Right? So it's and a lot of us do this in printmaking where we'll just like mix an ink and then do what's called a drawdown. And I don't know if you can tell, but a lot of these colors, not all of them are opaque. So I could even do drawdowns across to see how they overlap. It's very, very visual. However, I know exactly what cans of ink I had at my, on hand to mix these colors. So I could replicate them again, even though that's like such a weird beigey, beigey brown. So yeah, it's not it kind of depends on the manufacturer and which are you using graphic chemical colors or hand ski or which ink manufacturer you're using. Cranfield, are they water-based, are they oil-based? Speedball, Gamblin, like all of those manufacturers actually predetermine a palette. So if you are in that family of inks, they play well together. But if you start grabbing a can from a different manufacturer and trying to mix it into the family you're using, they might not play well together. And then your prints won't work because it's such a physical thing to get the ink onto the plate to make an image and then transfer it. So it gets like layers of complicated. We kind of have to trust the palettes that we have access to in some ways. But Hannah uses strictly a CMYK palette, so I'll let her answer that in her terms as well.
Thank you, Laura. With my color palette in particular, it's something that has already been formulated and people have been replicating and using CMYK in different ways for so long now, with industrial work and fine art printing. And so an example of maybe like replicating color and would be like tinting, kind of what I talked about in my presentation a bit. And we also use we use like color theory for references. And so that's something that we can always reference, color theory and what we've been taught in the color classes and the basic understandings of how colors interact. I think that whenever we all like mix inks, and especially with layering, we can go back and reference those lessons that we were taught from the color class.
Thank you. Okay, Luann had a question specifically for Analee, and that is, can you speak more about your experience learning about different uses of color in cultures throughout history and why this is such a rich subject to study?
So I have been taking a polychromy class for this past semester about the Mediterranean, and we've been looking at how pigments are formed and what pigments were local for X region, or if say like you were looking at the Fayum mummy portraits and like you did a restoration project and you noticed that there's a lot of Egyptian blue. There is a lot of cultural and like historical context about trade and what was going on and how people thought about color. And it was very object based, which I found fascinating because the way that we think about color is a lot more conceptual now than it was in the ancient world. And there are like a lot of writers who, like Pliny, who talk about like how color was used or the materiality of certain objects for sculpture, like bronze or other metals. And I think it's very fascinating for people to learn about because it's like this is a lot of like cultural history and like the colors that people wore or like could not wear can tell you a lot about what was going on at the time, from like the red of a Roman cape to like the wine dark sea in the Homeric epics. Like it gives a more vibrant idea of art history and just history be past like Western, what we know in the Western world.
That's absolutely true. I think the history of color really tells you about the history of people and human interaction. in very detailed levels. I have a question for Sarah. Did you develop any or have any unique problems since you were interested in using fluorescent colors?
Oh, sorry if you hear talking. There's like a class going. Uh, so with fluorescent colors, especially in the process of like I use mostly screen print, is that screen print fluorescents are typically very thin. And so you almost have to use them as like a mix into something more like heavy. Like if you could mix it into a pink that you developed with white and then add like half of a fluorescent like container of pink. I think that's kind of how you achieve it, but also thinking about the colors you lay next to it will totally affect vibrancy. And if like things start vibrating next to each other, if they're like very similar in hue or if they're very different, and like if you have a matte black, like if you lay just a base fluorescent pink on top of it, the black will just absorb it just because of like how light travels.
Yeah, that's my recollection. It's very transparent. Yeah, great. Thank you. And also, you explain a little bit more about how Shinkolay is used with screen printing.
So I was using Shinkule as almost like a way to be more modular with the work. I think that if I had just planned it straight out, like, okay, this print is definitely going to go in this section of the work. This one's going to definitely sit on like on top of this image. There would have been a lot, almost too much planning ahead of time. And I think what I enjoyed about is that it made something that's typically very easy to replicate and is something that can be used in a more like monoprint-esque type of way in which things can shift around. Like I'm responding to the work very much more immediate than I would if I were just doing straight up screen print onto the page.
Wow, that's a great point, is the more intuitive process kind of creeps in at that point. Wonderful. I am out of questions, Luann, so if you have any questions.
There's one more question from Wayne.
Wow, okay.
To those who created a color library, how much have you used it subsequent work?
Esther, do you have a color library?
I have a very limited palette that I like to use. So I'm often just mixing the same browns and blues over and over again. And I use them up pretty frequently. So I kind of just know what muted blues and browns I like, and I mix from there. But it is just when I'm thinking about color in my work, it's usually like, what muted blue am I gonna choose to use today?
That's more
Nice.
like a color methodology.
Yeah. I think I use up all my ink so much that I don't even build up a library. Like it's just need to remix it.
Well, and we kind of like by trial and error, because we work by hand so much with color, we learn what works for what we want to do, and the same could be said for how we use screen printing or etching or lithography too. We kind of learn what works for what we want to do with those methods. But yeah, I think Analee, you had some really great images with your CMYK exploration and the library that you developed about, especially about magenta. Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, so I have a color journal that I started in Laura's class and I've been using ever since. So I would like take a lot of drawdowns and write the recipe of different inks. Like for example, I have like a blue that takes one part Phthalo, one part Midnight, one part, and like I would have that written down. And I would have that there as a cross reference if I want to make a different color palette that isn't pink blue or red green or like white yellow. And then and since I mostly do etching actually, like my thesis work is very different from what I normally do, which is etching or like bookmaking. So I record the colors all the same. And with the magenta, I've been messing around with that both in painting experiments and print experiments with screen print and making magenta objects are using that as a mid-tone or like a spot color to highlight specific aspects in a relatively dark palette.
Wow, we have just gotten two really great questions in, so I'm going to just run over a little bit and ask you, in your print storytelling, do you research how the colors are going to enhance the message for the viewer, or is it just your personal palette?
It is a little bit of both. Like, I do a lot of research on the psychology of color, which leads to the idea of impossible, like the idea of color representing the impossible, or like blank spots, or using those like trick spots in your brain. But I'm not a scientist, so it's not like very precise. But I have a very personal color palette, which fellow classmates have called it very purple. And it's mostly filled with jewel tones, deep blues, and dark reds, and aforementioned violet.
I mean, anyone else can answer that question as well. I feel like everyone spoke about, like Sarah, you have the contrast between the black and white photography and then your bright fluorescent collaged palette with screen printing, and Esther, the sepia, the history of sepia tone, which, I mean, the mezzotint is such a photographic process in some ways. And then Hannah with CMYK too, and it's the relationship between like image processing and film and printmaking and the way you're putting your images together. I don't know if any of you want to talk more about, those color messages with your techniques, I guess, and how you research that for your viewers.
I think I kind of touched on it, but I'm really thinking about like age in terms of color, like what it means for something to look old through the colors that you use. So that tends to be like a desaturated color that seems like maybe it wasn't so light fast, and so it's kind of lost some of its pigment. So that's usually what I'm drawing from when I'm thinking about color.
Any others? Okay, then our final question is from Luann, and it's to Lori, and it said, you mentioned that the color class that you developed was required for printmaking students. Were there any other color classes before that, and how did you find color changed and became more relevant in the communication for all of us? Has there been a wide interest in expanding the color course for all students?
I really appreciate this question, Luann. I mean, there are workshops in our foundation year, which is a separate curriculum. So that's the first year students, the freshmen, where they will explore color, but it's very like faculty dependent. Maybe the students, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's like a standard curriculum for right. So the first year students don't all learn color in the same way. It just depends on the curriculum and that they choose, and also the faculty that they have. There are some assignments built in. There might be a class here and there in the painting department as well. There's definitely a color sort of dye class in the fibers department too, and I'm pretty sure ceramics has a lot to, because the way they work with color in ceramics is so chemistry related. So it's like every discipline has its own language, its own tools, its own processes with color, because we're very much a school of makers at KCAI, so we all have our hands in our work for the most part. So there was not a standardized curriculum, no, at KCAI, and there wasn't really like a standout class that existed before the color and printmaking class became a required. It's taught every fall, and sometimes if there's seats open in the class, other students across campus can take it as well as an elective. I think there is a wider interest with some faculty and some departments in putting like a standardized curriculum together for the school. So that conversation is ongoing. It's not resolved. I'm certainly part of that conversation. And I love this question, like, how has the field of color changed and become more relevant to communication for all of us? And I would say, like, the relevancy was always there. Like, I think it's more like what's changed is how we now understand color. It's relevant, and we want to understand it, right? We want to understand it in a more deeper or more personal or more practical or more what are the cultural relevancies of color, etc. So the relevancy was always there. We're humans, we see it, we understand it in ways that are beyond words. We live in the world. It's all around us. We dream in color. Yes, I do. I know this for a fact. But how, in terms of its relevancy, it's like we have to understand it in a deeper way as well. So that's something that I really try to guide my students to think about. That color is not arbitrary in their work. It's not just technical. It can be very personal. It can be very practical. And it does tell a story, and it does, it's really easy to say it tones the work, right? So could be an emotional tone. There could be a political tone. There could be a personal tone. There could be an agenda with color, etc. So that's how I like to explore it. I don't know if any students want to like add on to that from your experience, especially since y'all are seniors. You've been, through various classes. Some of you even were in illustration and painting as well.
I know personally, I transferred into the printmaking department from the painting department, and I actually did miss out on the color and printmaking class. Unfortunately, I didn't get to take it. So my understanding of color started in the painting background. Um, and it was very intuitive there. There wasn't really a course where I was taught specifically like color theory. But I definitely like transitioning from painting to printmaking, learning how to mix ink. It's like a whole different ball game. Like I was so used to painting where one, you mix way more, you need way more paint than you need ink. So like first time mixing ink, I'm like mixing a giant pile and I'm being told like that's actually way too much and you're kind of wasting materials. But also just like not being used to how strong the pigments are in ink, and just like you added the tiniest bit of a blue into your yellow and all of a sudden it's like a vivid green and you're like, oh, I was just trying to get a little bit in there. And so it's definitely a balancing game, and it's been really fun to learn color through the lens of printmaking, kind of on my own terms outside of the class.
Thank you all for sharing that. All right, I think we are almost getting to a little bit run over. Well, I want to thank you to all our guests for sharing your beautiful and inspiring work. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for a 16th Fluorescent Friday. Stay tuned for details of our next Fluorescent Friday event in the fall to find out which university will be illuminated in the Fluorescent Friday spotlight. We invite you to visit the Color Council website at iscc.org to sign up for newsletter, become a member, and to learn more about all of our programs, including Color Impact 2025, this upcoming June conference focused on color as communication. Thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and have a colorful fluorescent Friday.